Okay, this is chapter 2, part 1. Uh, this chapter we're going to keep really short, and I'm going to just only focus on just a handful of things that I want to stress from this chapter. It's a chapter that focuses on the data that we use in criminology, and that's really a subject that is more important in research methods course. It's not. I don't really see it as being central to your understanding, except to know that we have different sources of data, and that's what we use to learn and develop knowledge in the field of criminology. But I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it. We've got too many other important topics down the road that we need to get to. So let's move through this quickly. The first step to understanding, predicting, and controlling crime is to get the relevant facts with a high level of precision. So we need good information, reliable, trustworthy information, data, same sort of thing. And that's not always such an easy thing to get because, when you're studying humans, they're complicated. And when you're studying crime, it's not something that it's usually done in secret. And so it's hard to have good information on it because people are trying to hide what they're doing. And so, criminology has more of a challenge here than a lot of other different disciplines that are studying things where people aren't trying to hide what they're doing, right? So we do have a unique challenge there. The American system relies first and foremost on the uniform crime reports compiled by the FBI. So you should know the difference in the chapter between the uniform crime reports and the supplemental homicide supplemental crime data. That this is the basic stuff, the older system that the FBI collects police data from all around the country, all the police departments, sheriff's departments around the country, and organizes, collates that data to come up with statistics that tell us how much crime there is in the different areas, different jurisdictions all around the country. The FBI is in charge of that. And they've got, they got a website. You can go access all this data for free and all sorts of crime data. So that's been going on for decades, probably going back to good data going back to say 1960. So we use that a lot to give us a sense of what the crime problem looks like out there. Um, so that's police data. One source of data that we use is data that comes from the police. Make sure that you, for testing purposes, that you understand the different that we've sort of the criminal justice system has improved data by coming up with this supplementary um, crime data that the FBI puts together, that you don't have all of the police departments and sheriff's departments around the country submitting data on it, but it's one that's richer. It's got a lot more detail, but again, not super important. But you want to study that section of the chapter because there could be a question or two show up on the quiz about this police FBI data. So it reports reported crimes. This police data is going to be data where generally police find out about crimes by getting a call on the phone. I've just been victimized. I've just been robbed or something like that. So the police officers fill out a report, and then that report gets recorded and turned into statistics. And so what you're going to find if you go to the FBI's website, Uniform Crime Reports, you're going to find data of crimes that have been reported to the police, and also if those alleged crimes have resulted in an arrest. So you'll get data statistics on being arrested, very common statistics, and also what they call clearance rates. That's a little less common, but it's still sort of an important statistic because what that tells us is, and you want to know this, is this the percent of, that should say, known cases or cases that the police know about that have ended up in an arrest. So let's say that you have a city that's had 100 homicides in the past year, and you know about those because they've either been reported to the police a homicide, or they found a body and have concluded that it was a homicide. And the clearance rate would be, well, out of 100 murders that we know about, how many have been solved? Have, at least in the sense of resulting in an arrest. So having a probable, having a probable cause to be able to arrest somebody, good strong evidence that this person committed this crime, not proof, but a certain amount of evidence. So let's say you had 70 arrests made out of 100 homicides. Well, 70 out of 100 is 70%. So your clearance rate is 70%. You've cleared 70% of your homicides. And the flip side of that is that still 30 out of 100 homicides, the killer is unknown, or at least you don't have an arrest for that crime, at least yet. That's called clearance rate. Index crimes are the Part 1 offenses, serious offenses. So you can sometimes see them called index crimes or Part 1 offenses. This again is FBI data. And it's the serious stuff like murder, rape, arson, motor vehicle theft, burglary, breaking into somebody's house and see it. So the more serious, scary crimes, robbery, sticking somebody up, right? Those are Part 1 serious common kinds of crimes. Part 2 offenses are less serious ones that you get statistics on, but the statistics are usually not as good for these less serious crimes. And a lot of times you'll only get arrest data for those, which is only so helpful to you. Because, say, for example, a prostitution or something like that, which is, say, it's illegal in a jurisdiction. Well, it's, you don't have the victim calling the police and say I was victimized, because of the people who, that's like an illegal business transaction, somebody selling sex. And so the police aren't going to find out about it, generally speaking, because there's no victims that call the police or witnesses. And so you will have data on arrests, on how many people got arrested for that, but not data on how many crimes we know of that sort, because they don't get reported to the police. The crime rate. Now, by crime rate, why do we use this rates all the time? How come, you see crime rate, why do we use rates? What we mean by crime rate is the number of crimes in a year. And typically, it doesn't have to be 100,000 per 100,000 people in the population. They're going to use 100,000 per 100,000 for rare crimes like homicide. So, for example, right now in the United States, you might have about 5 people in the country murdered per 100,000 people in the country in, say, the past year or something like that. And so they would use per 100,000, because the rate is like 5 per 100,000. So 5 is a number that's kind of makes sense to people, and it's easy to handle, easier than something like, say, 0.5 or 5,000 or something. This denominator, this per 100,000, it could be per 1,000, or it could even be per 100, or depending on how common the crime is. If the crime's more common, then they would use a smaller denominator. So it's just for convenience and what is intuitive and makes sense to people. But the real question is, why do we use rates? How come we don't say, Pocatello had 10 murders last year? Why do we have to have a rate where it's like, 3 per 100,000? Why do we say that instead of saying, no, we just had 10 homicides last year? Why the use of rates? Rates allow us to compare different things in a valid way. So an example would be if you're trying to decide whether you want to move to Los Angeles and you're worried about your chances of, say, being murdered in Los Angeles versus Pocatello, and you want to know how much more dangerous it is down there than up here. You can't look at the total number of people who have been murdered. Say it's 10 in the last year in Pocatello and 1,000 in Los Angeles. You can't validly conclude that, wow, Los Angeles is super violent and dangerous and Pocatello is super safe, because that's apples and oranges. Los Angeles is much, much, much bigger than Pocatello, and so that it's not an equal comparison. Of course, you're going to have more murders in Los Angeles, because it's such a big place with millions and millions of people. So what you would need to do is look at the rate. So you look at the rate and you say, oh, I see Pocatello's got a rate of, let's say it's 2 people per 100,000, just as hypothetical example. And then you go look up on the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports data at, say, the city of Los Angeles or Los Angeles County or something like that. And you say, oh, Los Angeles County, they have a homicide rate of 15 people per 100,000. So there's this 15 per 100,000. Here it's 2. So okay, 15 is like 7.5 times bigger. Then it's a lot, several times more dangerous in Los Angeles than it is in Pocatello. So then you have, you're making an apples to apples comparison. You're taking two groups that are the two areas that are very different in size, and you're equalizing them by using a rate. So that's why we have rates, so that you can compare this group or this area with that area, and do so in a valid kind of way. So that's helps you, hopefully helps you understand what we mean by crime, why we use crime rates. Now, strengths and weaknesses of the Uniform Crime Report. I'm not going to discuss this in this video. I'm trying to keep coverage of Chapter 2 short, but you on your own in the chapter should be familiar with the strengths and weaknesses of any of the kind of data that we commonly use in criminology, because no data is perfect. Police data is got its problems. And so you want to know the strengths and the weaknesses of this Uniform Crime Report police data, and also the strengths and weaknesses of other data that we'll talk about here in a moment. But let's keep moving there. We're not gonna. So look that up, but don't stress about that. I'm not going to take the time to talk about that in the lecture. The U.S. violent crime and property crime rates have fallen a great deal over the past really about 25 years. A lot of times people don't know that. People that just watch the news assume that crime is always getting worse, that the violence and everything is always getting worse. But the truth is that violent crime, homicide is a fraction of what it was 25 years ago. 25 years ago, you had drive-by shootings like crazy, gang wars, and crack wars, that kind of stuff, where the homicide rate was more than double what it is now. And other sorts of crimes have dropped a lot since then. Now, we have seen since early summer, we've seen a spike in homicides in big cities around the country. So it could be, I hope this is not the case, but it could be that crime could be heading back up again. At least serious violent crime homicides might be heading back up in big cities. Hopefully not. But the big picture is that the country is significantly safer than it was, back in the early 90s. So that's good news. And, you can look at the details of this, of course, in the chapter. Now, and take a look at some of those stats, and it's always what a criminologist or a student of criminology wants to do is to, when you see a stat, to ask yourself why. How do we explain that stat? Why? How can we explain crime coming down in the past 25 years? What has changed in American society that could explain such a huge, big drop? What happened in the 90s and since that time to keep crime down? So that's what criminologists really try to do, is figure out these patterns. And if we figure out the patterns, that can help us figure out, well, how can we bring the crime rate even lower? How can we keep it low so that it doesn't go back up to those sky high levels from the 70s and the 80s and early 90s, right? So that's what a criminologist just doesn't look at facts or statistics, and that's the end of it. They try to figure out, what does that tell us? How do we explain those patterns? It can be tricky to make comparisons across states. But this is much more the case across countries. Homicide is considered the best type of crime for international comparison. So, criminal justice systems vary from country to country to country, and what their legal system is and how they define certain types of crimes varies some from country to country. So it's hard to make comparisons between different countries around the world. But homicide is probably our best type of crime to compare countries around the world, because it's similar from one country to the next and the data tends to be better on that than less serious kinds of crimes. So knowing that the homicide data tends to be the best, we have quite a few studies that compare countries around the world. And what we find that may or may not surprise you about the United States is that the United States does not have a high level of lots of different kinds of crimes, common crimes, property crimes, theft, all this sort of a little bit less serious types of crimes. But where we do stand out, at least compared to European countries, wealthy countries, is that we have a homicide problem. We have a homicide rate right now that's roughly like 5 people murdered per year per 100,000 people in the population. Typical Western European countries like 1 per 100,000. So we're, very roughly speaking, like 5 times higher than these countries that are similar to us in other ways, developed, wealthy, highly educated countries. We have definitely have a homicide problem. And again, here's the question for the criminologist or for the student. Why would that be? What is it about the United States that makes us unique to have a homicide problem that's several times higher than, say, England or France or Germany or one of these Western European countries that, Canada, Australia, places that are quite similar to the United States in some ways. So why do we have this violence problem? We don't really have a big problem with theft, with less serious kind of crimes, but with homicide we do. So that's just a question to throw out there for you to think about, because that's the kind of stuff we do. If you want to learn to be a criminologist, is you have to try to figure out what the heck's going on and why things are like they are. So America has improved its measurement of crime through the National Crime Victimization Survey, which is called the NCVS, because of the problems which I haven't gotten into on the police data, the uniform crime reports. Back in the early 70s, the U.S. government decided, well, let's call up tens of thousands of random households across the country and ask them if they've been a victim of crime in the past 6 months and what kind of crimes, and give us the details of the crimes. So we have a completely different type of data now, which we study as criminologists, that instead of asking police what crimes have happened, we ask victims of crime. We go straight to the victims and say, okay, well, tell us about this person who attacked you. Was it a guy? Was it a woman? How old did they appear? Race, things like that. And where did this happen? What time of day was it? All these details about the crime, and then criminologists study all those details and facts of crimes. That's called the National Crime Victimization Survey. It's like tens of thousands of people every year who get asked about being victims of crimes. Now, another thing, I'm not going to spend the time now, but in the chapter, look at the strengths and weaknesses of this victim data, this National Crime Victimization data. Where is it better than the police data? Where is it worse than the police data? What's bad about it? What's good about it? You need to know that. There could be a question or two show up on the quiz. Self-report data. This is one that in the early days, people were kind of skeptical about it, but they've embraced it a lot the past, probably since about the 50s or 60s, it started to take off. It's been a long time now, but for decades, people thought that if I was to pass out a questionnaire and ask you if you ever, committed a robbery or you ever raped somebody or, stolen something from the store or shoplifted or something like that, people assume that no one would ever admit that they've done bad things, that they've broken the law like that. So people were skeptical and they didn't do it for a long time. But again, starting in the 50s, 60s, they tried it out and they realized they discovered that people were surprisingly willing to admit a lot of bad things that they'd done, as long as they were told that, this is completely confidential, your name is not going to be attached to this, the police nobody's ever going to find out anything that you said. So when people are confident that nobody's going to find out anything, they're willing to confess to surprisingly serious crimes. And so because of that, it now has become probably, I would say, maybe the most commonly used sort of data, because it's easy to get. You just ask a group of people. I mean, I do this in my classes sometime. I'll have students and their friends and participate in these studies, and they'll admit to all sorts of naughty behaviors, right? And so it's used all the time. It's very convenient and handy, and it can be inexpensive and all of that. And so self-report, that's what they call this, when you're telling the researcher, usually in a questionnaire, could be an interview or something like that, different ways, but you're just basically confessing, admitting that you've done this in a private way where nobody's going to ever find out about it, that kind of thing. So it works surprisingly well. It has strengths and weaknesses too, and you should look at those in the chapter and make sure you understand what's good and bad about this self-report data. So the victim data, the police data, the self-report data gets used all the time. And all of them have their strengths and their weaknesses. Let's see. Now, I'm not going to talk about crime mapping. This is a big trend where police departments will use mapping out where crimes occur in a city to help. Again, they're looking for patterns to try to come up with explanations and solutions and strategies to fight crime. And this has become very sophisticated in especially large police departments across the country. And if you're someone who's a real techie numbers kind of person, this is a great job in criminology, is to go work for a police department, being their data person and analyzing crimes across the city and trying to help fight crime using this crime mapping. So it's a big thing nowadays. Of course, the use of technology is big everywhere, but definitely big in the criminal justice system. Now, the financial crime report, there's another thing that the FBI puts out, is the FBI tends to focus on more sophisticated crimes than your local police department. And so they focus on a lot of white collar, big business crimes, the crimes of the wealthy, the powerful, that sort of thing. So they put out a report, just like the uniform crime reports, they put out another report, which is called Financial Crime Report, where they give information and data on these business criminals or government criminals that where usually the crimes are financial, stealing, embezzling millions of dollars, from a company, or all sorts of crooked stuff like that done by people in high positions. So just remember, this is the FBI puts this out. It's called Financial Crime Reports, and it gives all sorts of information about these crimes and how they get prosecuted and what sort of sentences they get, all the details of that. Now, this dark figure of crime, you want to know this term. So this is one of the problems of police data, is that very often people don't call the police and let them know they've been victimized by crime. And the police usually are not going to know about a crime unless you call them and tell them. And so they call this the dark figure of crime, that the police statistics generally do not give a very accurate picture because they miss a lot of the crimes that happen because they never found out about them. A real strong example of this is the crime of rape, which is a very serious crime. And when you compare the victim data, asking people all around the country if they've been victimized by rape, compare that to the police data with the reports of rape that the police know about. And there's only about a third of these rapes get reported to the police. 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3 do not get reported to the police. And so that's what they mean by this dark figure of crime, that there's a lot of crimes that never get reported and never make it into the police statistics. So the police statistics are usually lower than the truth. They undercount how much crime is really going on out there. And this is a strength of the victim data, is that victims, you ask them on a survey and they're going to generally be pretty willing to tell you the truth, what happened. And then you've got knowledge about a lot of crimes that you didn't know about otherwise. In police statistics, many less serious crimes are never reported or known, right? So it's not only sensitive crimes like rape, but minor stuff. If you get your, some minor thing stolen of yours, you might not bother to call the police. So it doesn't make its way into the police statistics. We don't know about it. With victimization data, minor crimes are also likely to be reported. So minor stuff can be a problem in that people forget about it, or they don't call the police. They don't, when they get asked about it, it's happened a long time ago and it wasn't that big of a deal, so they've forgotten, that kind of thing. So minor crimes are a little bit more of a problem to get good data on. With self-reported data, many serious crimes are missed since most participants are relatively law-abiding and people are more reluctant to admit serious crimes. So it is true that if you're talking murder, rape, that sort of thing, people don't want to admit to really serious crimes, and they're reluctant to do that. Minor stuff, drug use or shoplifting or minor theft or getting in a fight with somebody, beating somebody up, people are pretty willing to admit that kind of stuff. But usually one of the big problems with self-reported data is that if I ask 500 people the bad things they've done, I'm not going to get anybody admitting to murder. So I can't study murder from their data because it's zero. I have nobody who's admitted to committing that crime. Same thing, same sort of thing with like rape or other robbery, serious crimes. it's hard to get enough people to say they've done it to be able to analyze that data. So self-reported data is better with less serious crime that people have actually will admit that they've done. All the sources of data are used to test various crime theories. Here's a term you should know: triangulation. Triangulation refers to how you use different data to see if you get the same results. So if your police data and your victim data and your self-reported data all tell the same story, that's triangulation, where they're all consistent, different kinds of data, but they tell the same story. And so let me give an example of this. All those different types of data all indicate that men commit more crimes than women. Men are more likely to be criminals than females. The police data show that, the victim data show that, the self-reported data show that. So we can be pretty sure that crime is a lot, is more a guy's problem than it is a female problem, statistically speaking. Of course, there's plenty of female criminals, but we're talking statistically here. We can be pretty sure of that. Well, not only is this common sense, but 3 different types of data tell the same story. So that's triangulation. We got different kind of data telling the same consistent story. That increases your confidence that you have the truth. That's a real solid, real finding that crime happens more among men than it does among women. So anyway, that's triangulation, a good term. So that does it on the chapter. Again, make sure as you read through the chapter, you know the terminology and any of the things I've told you to take a close look at. But terminology, key terms you should know, because I don't have time to cover all of those, but they are important. It's kind of a basic thing that you can study, that everybody should study. Okay, there we go.